I might need some of those coffee cards. We do these 7 a.m. breakfasts too often, especially after all the stuff, entertainment we have to do last night. So it's great to be here, and we've got a great speaker today. I think the topic's going to be very pertinent and ties into actually some of what we talked about at the round table yesterday, for those of you that were able to join us. So it should be exciting. A little background on me. I grew up in New Mexico. Regina and I were just talking about she had a chance to visit Las Cruces, which is not a lot of folks can say that unless they're driving through on Route 66. But my old man was electrical nuclear engineer at White Sands Missile Range for 30 years, which is why I grew up there. And it's an interesting story. I was talking to some folks last night. I went to New Mexico State University, and I'd never heard from the Alumni Association. And my wife and I were talking about that a couple of years ago, and out of the blue, I get a call from New Mexico State, and I said, "How did you find me?" After all these years, right? I graduated a long time ago. After all these years, they reached out to me, well, they bought one of Blackbaud's products. I'm thinking, this is probably not good, right? And so actually going back for my stepmom's 90th birthday here in a couple of weeks back to Las Cruces, and I'm going to go speak at New Mexico State to a couple of the classes and meet the deans, and I'm sure they're going to be hitting me up for some donations, but all for a great cause. First, when I got out of school, went to work for a company called Ernst & Winnie, which is obviously no longer around, and they merged with Arthur Young, and I switched from audit and went to a company called Pete Marwick, which became KPMG, and worked in the Albuquerque office in tax, and met my wife at a mergers and acquisition training seminar in Chicago, Illinois. I'm not sure if it was a merger and acquisition, but it's cost me a lot. This morning I went to kiss her goodbye, and she raised her head and almost cut my lip. But wonderful lady. She has 20 years in public accounting, so we had a lot of interesting discussions in the evenings, as you can imagine. Moved to Indiana after I had long distance dated with her for a year. Worked for Ernst & Young for a little bit, and then I got to the other side of the desk and worked for a couple of publishing companies. Ultimately got into the wireless business in Indianapolis and worked there for 13 years, which is where I got my first corporate public company CFO role for a very large company. We're almost $6 billion at one time. After 13 years, I'd had enough of that, traveled all over the world. I think pertinent to what Russ is going to talk about, I served as interim president of Europe, Middle East, and Africa while I was still a corporate CFO, which was quite an ordeal for 3 years, as you can imagine, doing both those jobs and back and forth to Europe. But left there, took some time off, took about 6 months. I was going to take a year and got restless, sent my resume out and saw lots of great opportunities, but one really attracted me, and I think it's probably the same reason you guys went into it, was the chance to have an impact, right? A different kind of impact on the world. And I just felt very fortunate that this Blackbaud opportunity came around, because as I looked at it, I'd had the same sense of pride you did, I think, being on boards of nonprofits or being a donor or being a volunteer. But this Blackbaud opportunity looked really interesting, because my thought was, if I come here and we do a really good job, I get to help tens of thousands of nonprofits have a bigger impact on the world. And I think that a lot of probably one of my best days was after Mike Giannone came on board and we rolled out our new strategy, because we knew this change in our approach, and you're starting to see a lot of that with our products and the acquisitions we're doing and all the great work on Sky architecture and the NXT versions of the product, is that we really are innovating and doing things differently than we had for 30 years. And that is going to have a wonderful impact on you guys. And you'll hear a lot of those success stories. You probably heard some yesterday. You'll hear more today in the keynote and tomorrow. But the product and the integration of analytics and AI and all the things we're doing, we were talking this morning on some of the reporting changes with NXT that's going to make your lives much better, a lot more visibility to the numbers. I think it'll tie into what Russ is talking about, how you drive strategy and drive the business. So I felt very fortunate that I ended up here. And I've enjoyed it. It's been I'll be here, I guess I've been here just 6 years. October was my 6-year anniversary, and it's been really phenomenal. As leaders, you guys get to wear a lot of hats. I know I do as well. It seems that, by the time we're helping with administrative or HR or legal or facilities or all the other roles that we take on, if you're like me, sometimes you find a hard time to find enough time to do your accounting. Right? It's almost secondary because you have all these other roles and responsibilities. And Russ is going to get into that a bit with us. There's no question that our roles are very important. You contribute to the future success, right, and the vision of the company, and help drive a lot of that helping determine where you make investments in the business and how you allocate resources. The difficulty, I think, is, the question we asked is, how do we keep our CEO and our board of directors and all our constituents happy while we're doing all of that? And the good thing is I don't have to be smart enough to answer that because we got Russ here with us today to do that work for us. So let me introduce Russ and get him up here. Russ has got 30 years of experience in nonprofit finance and administrative departments. As president and CEO of his own consulting firm, Claverick Advisory Group, Russ Pomeranz joins us to expertly answer that question of how nonprofit CFOs are critical to the mission success. Russ is currently working with multiple nonprofits, has been published in the New York Times, Chronicle of Philanthropy, and the CPA Journal. You can find several of his white papers he's written exclusively for Blackbaud on our website. And then Russ has a degree in economics from Harvard, and then an MBA from the University of Michigan, which my Hoosiers gave a good run in overtime the other day. Please join me and welcome Russ.
Well, thank you, Tony, and thank you all for coming so early in the morning, and a big thanks to Blackbaud for giving me the opportunity to answer the question, why nonprofit CFOs are critical to mission success. I also want to give a big thanks to Nicole. We've been working together the last 3 years. She discovered me. So it's been a great partnership. So I got into the nonprofit financial management completely by accident. After business school, I was hired by Arthur Andersen in Australia, so it sounds like Tony and I share an experience with defunct accounting companies that have propelled us to the next step. I started there and I started in the computer consulting division. So in anticipation of a work visa to Sydney, I started in Washington, D.C. And after 3 weeks of COBOL training boot camp, I had a feeling I would be mired in transactional detail, but I didn't know there was no strategic glimpse or exposure to any big picture understanding that I would find particularly interesting. So after less than a year, I was itching to be connected to a compelling organizational, financial, and mission story. So my next constructive step was to teach math. I applied to be a math teacher at the Murray School, a nonprofit independent school in Washington, D.C. The headmaster called me up and said, I don't care if you want to be a math teacher or not, but we've got to bring our business office into the 20th century. The business manager was retiring and was dead set against any accounting system that had to be plugged in. I was hired, and upon arrival was given a computer with Blackbaud software, and Blackbaud was very helpful as I tried to set this up, and told to just figure it out. However, I was still determined to teach math, geometry as it turned out. I assumed it would have a direct impact on the well-being of a bunch of students. I don't think I fully realized at the time, but my intuition told me that there was value to be involved in the nonprofit's mission. Being part of the math department and faculty was instrumental in figuring out what the school did, how the school worked, but also to understand how the finances connected to the mission of teaching kids. I learned that the financial reports told stories of financial viability, sustainability, all ultimately related to mission success. I realized that organizational financial success had an impact on mission success, and mission success had an impact on financial success. The two were inextricably linked. So the goal of this presentation is to make the case that nonprofit CFOs, as leader of the financial function, is a critical conduit between financial and mission success. While this has been true in the past, is true now, it is even more necessary in an extremely competitive and changing world trying to deal with short and long-term challenges. If the ultimate goal of the nonprofit sector is to impact society in positive ways through education, healthcare, arts, social services, research, public policy, advocacy, direct service, a compelling case must be made that the nonprofit CFO have a seat at the strategic mission table. There may even become a time when they should be at the head of the table, and that's what Tony is going to talk about briefly. That's the question I'm going to ask of Tony later on. While I may be preaching to the mission-infused CFO choir here today, I also want to be able to make the case to those who might not intuitively get the importance of the role. This includes CEOs, program staff, and leadership, funders, and believe it or not, nonprofit finance committee and boards. It is no longer surprising to me how many nonprofit finance committees who oversee the budget and audit process and are key to moving forward instead of backward don't understand the fiduciary responsibility of strategically growing mission impact. So this conversation is meant to get everyone in the room thinking about our role and how we contribute to mission success. As a nonprofit CFO, are we the strategic visionary that nonprofit needs? And when we take a step back and think about the picture as a whole, or do we too often revert to the myopic bean counter role that ultimately limits the strategic scope of the financial function? In my presentation today, I wanted to think about the role in more descriptive ways, moving beyond the CFO title. I thought about what we enjoyed most about the CFO role and what I was most proud of. So 3 subjective roles jumped out at me: a builder, a strategic decision maker, and an organizational corporate cultural trendsetter, something I'm sure you've all been thinking about for a while. First, the builder builds a sustainable financial structure that meets mission needs, goals, and aspirations over time. Second, the strategic decision maker pushes the organization along the right path to mission and financial success. Third, the organizational cultural trendsetter creates an environment of financial and program alignment, integration, and transparency, all necessary to achieve mission success. The builder is probably the role I am most proud of and which best represents the lasting legacy of the mission successful CFO. The strategic decision maker is probably the most interesting in the short term and a test of my professional judgment, logic, analytical capacity, and ability to solve problems. The cultural trendsetter makes me feel part of a team as a leader, a partner, and participant in the interesting work and mission of the nonprofit. It makes for an enjoyable and productive work environment, enables me to make friends, despite the fact I'm the CFO. The underpinnings of successfully fulfilling these roles is found in understanding the nonprofit's mission needs, aspirations, and impact. In other words, the financial function should know what the organization wants to do, know what the organization, when it wants to do it, and how they should do it. Answers to the following questions may help the CFO connect finance to mission. Questions like, which you should be asking all the time: what kind of organization do we want to be? What services and programs do we want to provide over time? What sort of impact do we expect the organization to have as a whole? What programs in specific are critical to mission success? What exactly is mission success in the short and long term? And how do we know if we've achieved mission success? Can we control our own destiny to the extent it is possible to achieve desired results? And are we in a unique period of time where we are best positioned to take advantage of mission opportunities? As I mentioned, I'm especially drawn to the role of builder. As a CFO, this represents the identifiable building blocks of organization and mission success, which often outlive our tenure in the organization. The CFO builder takes pride in many contributions, but 3 areas are probably most relevant to mission success. I describe them as: first, the builder of a sustainable financial structure that meets mission needs and aspirations over time. Second, the builder of a sustainable and dynamic business model that finds the revenues and efficiently and effectively manages expenditures. And third, the builder of a sustainable financial function and organizational infrastructure that will support and contribute to programmatic success. So let me give some examples. What does a sustainable financial structure look like? The answer aligns the financial aspirations of the organization with the mission aspirations of the organization. First, in my experience and in conversation with other CFOs, I prioritize and focus on total unrestricted net assets. Unrestricted net assets, as you know, are basically a pool of capital the organization or management controls. Unlike temporarily restricted net assets, there are no budgeted and defined expenses attached to them. They can be used as a reserve to cover specific deficits such as gaps in indirect cost recoveries, to invest in administrative and development, staff leadership, to invest in new programs, and to cover uncovered program leadership. Unrestricted net assets can meet the immediate program needs that times require, or meet the long-term strategic needs as they change and evolve. So here's a recent example. At the Vera Institute of Justice, where a criminal justice think tank for which I had been COO, CFO, and returned on a consulting basis, it had become clear to us that criminal justice reform had become a societal priority. Whether it was related to policing, immigration reform, sentencing, corrections, bail practices, a robust and impactful agenda was an opportunity, if not a necessity. So given the size of the need, a significant pool of unrestricted money over and above our current reserve would be the key to our mission's success. Waiting for restricted funding might seed outcome metrics to the funders, which might not necessarily be aligned with our own metrics and priorities. We also didn't want any underfunded or undercapitalized initiatives, so we knew we needed to have enough financial resources to fully fund our strategic goals and programs. So as an organization, we identified current and future program needs, building on current programs, building innovative new programs, building demonstration projects, investing in earned revenue streams, expanding our communication efforts, and identifying a rapid response policy capacity, and building a program development, financial, and administrative leadership capacity. It was a lot, but we were very ambitious. So to take on this investment, ability to make this investment on our own terms, we estimated close to $50 million in unrestricted net assets was necessary to fund our efforts. And also at the same time, we wanted to keep a significant reserve. We assumed some restricted funding over time would augment our efforts. But the clarity, need, and ultimate long-term financial structure drove the compelling mission case for the capital campaign. We didn't do a feasibility study, but due to strong relationships with foundations willing to invest in the organization and what we were trying to do, in addition, a significant investment in our development capacity, a return to unrestricted net income profitability, we actually achieved the majority of this goal within 2 to 3 years. As it was a dynamic process, we invested in new initiatives along the way. We thought it would start a cycle of mission success, confidence, and sustainability, which would bring new sources of unrestricted, and as it turned out, additional restricted money. One note is that we generally avoided building an unrestricted board-designated fund. I don't know how many of you have board-designated funds, but we felt it was a question of control. We thought an experienced management team was in the best position to invest the unrestricted net assets over time. Not that we didn't respect the board's enthusiastic oversight, but we felt management best understood the mission investment risks and returns, as well as short and long-term imperatives. We did, however, set up a board committee focused on organizational and management risk. I don't know whether this is a topic that's come up here, but dealing with risk is one of the key issues that a lot of organizations are facing. Understanding what those risks is important too. So the pillars of a successful business model are built around achieving financial, program, strategic, and administrative goals. Often these goals are embedded in a fiscal year budget or several fiscal year budgets. What an organization accomplishes during any given fiscal year or years is integrated and aligned with achieving desired financial results. As a CFO, I felt responsible for identifying and prioritizing building blocks of a successful business model. These include A, running unrestricted net asset break-even or surplus budgets. I would do everything possible to make this happen while maintaining the strength of the programs. As a CFO, I own that organizational bottom line. I will push program leadership, development, CEOs, board, anybody I can find, my own team, to give me options and ideas on both the revenue side and the expense side so that I can run that unrestricted surplus. B, building up diverse revenue streams that enable the organization to cover core program costs. CFOs should never be shy about pursuing new sources of revenue, including earned revenues, government funders, federal, state, and local, foundations, individuals, events, etc. Third, the model also requires building into grants and contracts an indirect cost rate that minimizes the gap between indirect cost and indirect cost recoveries. Building a sustainable business model that perpetuates long-term mission success, whatever that looks like, after you've asked all these questions, is at the core of the CFO role. Third, the third builder role is of a sustainable organizational infrastructure that supports mission success. Obviously, building the financial function to meet the needs of the organization is required. It is always important to clarify roles and define responsibilities within the finance department. However, structured and purposeful interactions with all programs as well as development is also required. One of the things that I always talk about is any conversation you go into with the program side or development, you go into that with your own agenda, and you expect them to have an agenda too. That's how the conversation is structured. It is also very important to build up IT infrastructure and capacity. I mention this not only to ensure everything runs smoothly and accurately in the finance and the accounting and fundraising department. IT offers a competitive business advantage for finance and mission when pursued strategically and thoughtfully implemented. The investment in new or existing software not only builds transparency and better communications into the culture, it also integrates systems to better understand and link program and financial results. It enables a much more robust budget and forecast process, better analysis, and a timely and informed decision-making process. One of the priorities of the organizational infrastructure is to integrate financial development and program data to produce financial forecasts on a timely basis. While somewhat intended, as I've described these three different layers of being a builder, it should be no surprise that the builder role corresponds to the story behind the statement of financial position, the statement of activities, and the statement of functional expenses. I carry around the financial statements of any organization I'm involved with or work for all day long. I tell everyone they should glue it to their head. Wherever they go, they should have a set of financials with them. So to ensure that the fiscal year financial and mission story goes as expected and planned, the CFO cannot be a passive bystander. They have to be a productive, strategic decision maker. Nobody puts the nonprofit CFO in a corner. For those of you who want to connect the CFO role to Dirty Dancing. So there are three areas where the CFO's role as a strategic decision maker is of existential mission importance. They are cash, mission investment, and third, development-focused roles and responsibilities. Cash, or management by cash versus management by accrual methods of accounting, is a trade-off of short versus long-term strategic decision-making. Strategic decisions, unless the organization is in cash extremis, should not be predicated by cash on hand. So I want to quote just from a recent Blackbaud article, the most recent one I wrote, just because I think this quote is very appropriate. The business office needs to stay ahead of the cash flow curve, identifying potential cash reserves and assets, including but not limited to fixed assets and board-designated investments, that could be sold can mitigate potential harm. Otherwise, finance committees have been known to review bank balances on a short-term basis, a job and level of responsibility that does not serve anybody's interest. Management will resent the intrusion, and the organization can become mired in a conflict over fiduciary oversight, shifting the state of mission momentum and drive from one of forward-thinking strategic vision to one of financial sclerosis. And this is something that I'm sure we've all seen, but dealing with boards and finance committees that are so focused on short-term cash they can't see the bigger picture and can't invest in the bigger picture. I don't know whether you've experienced, but I've seen it so often. And ultimately, against other competitive organizations, your organization is going to lose out, especially given the times. The second area of strategic decision-making is timely mission investment, the deployment of financial resources to meet strategic goals and opportunities. So I have an example of financing initiating mission investment opportunities with good outcomes. At the Vera Institute of Justice, we had a $10 million investment pool with a 5% spending rate. The annual $500,000 draw was generally used to cover the deficit and indirect cost recoveries. However, we determined that we needed to jumpstart our programmatic revenue streams to grow existing programs and put together a new program pipeline. I made the case that a second 5% draw to invest in revenue-building opportunities would increase the probability of mission success. It was an internal RFP. We provided internal grants of $30,000 to $50,000 to any department, including administrative and development departments, which made a compelling case that investment would increase program revenue streams and impact or streamline operations. We also were looking for a greater investment in research and evaluation necessary to measure outcomes and evaluate program impact was another area that we also encouraged. We selected 8 to 10 proposals, implemented them, and in many cases, it worked out. Finance had influenced mission outcomes. The genius of this, and I think this organization will appreciate this, was that I insisted proposals include application of our 23% indirect cost rate. So it actually improved our operating bottom line when we implemented it. The non-operating bottom line obviously did not improve, but our above-the-line operating did improve. The finance department is also an integral strategic decision maker when it comes to building development capacity. At Vera, as COO, CFO, I knew we needed more unrestricted net asset fundraising capacity. So we built and sold the case, and talking to the head of the board, all the trustees, even the CEO, and built the case for the Vera Development Department, the first Vera Development Department, and then hired our first development director. We actually raised $750,000 in our first big event. This sequence has played out in many organizations, but not in many others. Ultimately, indecision and a passive approach to meeting financial needs leads to a financial and mission treadmill. Finance has to build a compelling financial and mission case to frame decisions to get off that treadmill. Your competitors, they will do it if you don't. Staying pat is no longer an option. I've always said that the nonprofit CFO is the loneliest job in the organization. By nature of the title, everyone thinks you are there to cut things down to size, to achieve bottom line goals. This is regardless, you're cutting regardless of all the good work the organization does. That perception does not have to be reality. Every CFO needs their own PR capacity to communicate their collaborative corporate vision. They have to be an organizational cultural trendsetter. There are a few cultural trends the CFO should be in front of. The CFO needs to establish mutually beneficial relationships with all parts of the organization. We want to be a partner and advisor to the CEO. We want to offer solutions and options, an understanding of the trade-offs, and most importantly, a way forward. Transparency and clarity of the program's impact on the bottom line and vice versa cements this relationship. I would assemble all the program heads when the audit was complete and go over the entire audit with them. I would have them circle the unrestricted bottom line 20 times, and everyone was walking around with all these beat up both financial reports over and over, so they knew what it meant for them and what it meant for finance. We talked about what their contribution was to that bottom line and why it was important. Communication of financial and mission stories also sets a cultural trend between the CFO and the finance committee and board. The CFO committee wants to know the whole but distilled story while maintaining its oversight on finance and mission. Before each Finance Committee meeting to discuss the audit, the fiscal year budget, forecast, cash investment results, I would prepare what I called a budget narrative. I would put the fiscal year results or the forecast into perspective and context to understand the past as it applied to the present and the future. I would discuss opportunities, contingencies, short and long-term decision-making, and keep everyone aware of our financial and programmatic priorities. The best part about this was I could set the agenda going into the meeting and keep it on course. I also, in planning for these meetings, used to try and imagine what questions we were going to get from certain board members, because there was always one board member who was going to ask a question totally off the wall. So we spent time preparing for that person's questions and responding directly to them. I would also have the CEO and executive director lead off any and all financial committee meetings. They were there to tell about all the exciting things the organization was doing, preparing to do, and what they had accomplished. I always found that the achievement of mission goals and impact put the Finance Committee in a much better mood to discuss finances, assuming it was good news. If it's not good news, you got to come up with a whole different strategy. As treasurer of nonprofits, and I've seen sort of both sides of the aisle, I expected a similar narrative from the executive director and finance department to put the finance and mission in perspective as we look forward. A cultural trendsetter focuses on intangible organizational characteristics such as flexibility, curiosity, question asking, and listening. For me, I wanted to know how things worked, why things work, and where everyone was trying to get to, and are they getting there? Other than, huh? Or what are you talking about? My favorite question was, what does this mean? I'm also very curious to know what is behind the mission results and often ask what will go right, and I ask a lot, what is going to go wrong? And spend more time on what's going to go wrong, even though everyone tells me everything is going to go right. As CFO, I want the entire organization to be aware of the financial function's commitment to mission while expecting their respect for all business office roles. As many of you know and have experienced, mutual respect and appreciation for the role the finance function plays is critical to the department's success. The amount of emotional energy wasted in achieving basic respectful norms can put the entire organization at risk. The CFO and finance team must be appreciated for the integral role they play in the success of the mission. In their role as builders, strategic decision makers, and organizational corporate trendsetters, nonprofit CFOs can make mission success happen. Can there be any other suitable outcome? That's the speech portion. So I had some questions for the crowd, for the team here, that I'm going to ask, and then I have a question for Tony. So if the questions for the group is, and I want each participant to think about, do these roles I describe exist within your organization and represent your reality? Do you want to play these roles? If you don't, and do you feel the role of the nonprofit CFO could be even greater or more significant? So these are things that we don't necessarily have to respond to today, but these are things that you should think about, the ability to sort of take that step back. So along the lines that we've talked about here and what I've outlined, I wanted to ask Tony a question. Tony brings a unique perspective to the CFO discussion in that he also served as president of Blackbaud's interim CFO. So my question for Tony is, could there be better mission outcomes if more nonprofit CFOs were considered for and ultimately took on the role of CEO? Tony will answer that, and then we'll answer questions from the crowd. Thank you.
So as I spoke earlier, I had a chance to fill in as interim president of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and at my old job at Brightpoint. And then while we were doing the search for our new CEO here 4 years ago now, before we got Mike hired, I was the interim CEO for a few months, which was a really unique experience. I'd say that we as CFOs, especially at the breadth of our responsibilities now with all of the operations and legal and IT and all the other things that we typically are responsible for, have a great grounding in the business. The challenge, I think, in moving into the role is not whether we have a skill set. I think, there's a lot of successful CEOs you can look at that come from sales or from marketing or from finance or from legal or COOs, whatever that is. So I don't think our experience level is the question. I think several things I noted when I had to move into those interim roles was making sure you have the right team underneath you, working with you, right, the succession candidates, because as you move into a CEO role, and Patrick knows, and Michael, they were here when we were going through those transitions, is you can't still do your old job, right? So there's a big difference in being the CFO and what we focus on versus what the CEO needs to be focused on. Culture, strategy, future vision, sales, marketing, it's a different beast. And so you have to really be able to set those responsibilities that you had aside and have to have a really good team that can take that, right, or have a good succession candidate that you can hand that to, whether that's your controller or somebody else, or divvy up your role to all those separate individuals. But you can't still do your old job and be successful at the new is one thing that I found. I think you have to really focus more on culture, the tone you set with the organization in the CEO role. So your softer skills, I think, are probably the biggest thing that you have to look at. I think, again, the experience that we all have would perfectly suit us to be in a CEO or a president role. It's whether we have the right soft skills to build the right culture that you need throughout the org is going to be the critical piece. It's definitely a different beast, a lot of fun, but also it comes with some big challenges, and you've got to deal with the breadth of the entire org and a lot of the difficulties that come with that, because now the challenges that you may have had, there was always a tiebreaker, right? So as a CFO, I know at Blackbaud, I can still go to Mike at the end of the day, and Mike's going to be one that has to make that hard decision when I don't agree with Kevin or Brian or whomever on the executive team about what we should do next. When you're the CEO, you're that last person standing, right, who has to make those decisions, and so that does come with challenges. But I do think, especially now with the breadth of our roles, that we're very well suited, and what I'd suggest to any of you that have that kind of interest, really focus on the strategy. Our session yesterday talked a lot about it. A lot of what Russ just talked about, that future vision, how to push the org in the right direction, all of those pieces and parts, and then your soft skills, effective culture building, all of those pieces would be the critical. Thanks, Russ.
And if I can say, one of the things that I've done, again, not sort of by design or plan, is it's really important to get to the vision is to serve on nonprofit boards and play a role and ask questions not necessarily related to strictly about the finances. I mean, too often I get on boards and I'm the treasurer. Well, I like being treasurer, but I want to see everything else. I want to be much more connected to the mission. And so I always ask a lot of questions, and I ended up being the president of like 3 nonprofit organizations, which is like really, treasurers don't necessarily ascend to the president or chair of nonprofits. But really what it was is I didn't necessarily know all about the program needs, but as Tony said, you've got to make sure you assemble the team and you ask the team questions, but you really focus in on the right questions. Where are you trying to get to? How are you going to get to? How are you going to use finances to get there? What sort of strategic planning process you need to go through? What your competitors are doing? So you've really got to focus in by asking questions and learning where the mission has to take you. So but taking advantage of any opportunities you have to be on boards and play a role that is not necessarily the treasurer is a very good way to understand the bigger picture of the organization.